Hello, everybody out there on the interwebs. My name is James Murwa, and welcome to the Writing Africa podcast. Today is episode 42, and we're going to be talking about 12 years of the Writing Africa project. Let's talk about the journey we've been on for the last 12 years, and I hope you enjoy. Please remember, you can support the work we do on this project monetarily on Patreon, PayPal, Ko-fi, and mobile money. And you can get information on this at writingafrica.com/donate. In April 2013, I was having drinks with some friends of mine at the Porterhouse. It was a bar in Nairobi on Mama Ngina Street. I used to like having drinks there with friends. And on one of these days, I met a guy from Cote d'Ivoire, and we started having a conversation. And he asked me, "Hey, what do you do? What do you do for a living?" And I told him, "I work for a newspaper. I'm a columnist. I'm an editor." And he said, "Yeah, that's your ugali writing. What's your own writing?" For those who don't know what ugali is it's our staple meal here. So he was saying that, that's your staple food, but where's the other stuff? And I just said, I don't really have any writing except sort of the one I'm doing for my newspaper. And that stuck with me. I remember that I went home and I was thinking, actually, I used to write a lot more. Why don't I write anymore? I only write for the newspaper. I took it as a challenge and I decided to register a domain. And the domain I registered was my name, jamesmurwa.com. And the reason I chose that was because I said, whatever project I do, in case it doesn't work out, I can always, just use that domain to put in my resume and it becomes my resume website. The category I decided to be following and archiving at the time was African writers. And I knew at the time that people really weren't talking about writers from Africa in the way I would like to have seen it, I was seeing people doing wonderful coverage of musicians, footballers, actors, but when it came to writers, it was very little. You'd have like maybe one or two review type things. Our website comes and goes. And I said, maybe I can try and, do something more comprehensive for African writers on this. So I registered the domain. I just started posting stuff, and I do book reviews. I started interviewing one or two writers. I get news from the same writers, or from Facebook or Twitter. And I'd post when I'm in the middle of my job. I'd make one post. It wasn't really serious. It was just something to keep myself busy. Something that I'm not doing my job, so doing something different. While doing this, I started attending local literary festivals. So we're talking about in Kenya, we have the Story Moja Festival, was really big at the time. We had the Nairobi International Book Fair. I'd cross the border, take a bus to Kampala. I'd go for the Writivism Literary Festival or the Babi Shai Festival. Great times were had. In 2015, I got a grant from an international organization that allowed me to travel a bit further afield. And that's when the project started having legs. I went to places like Somaliland for the Hargeisa International Book Fair. I went to the Gambia for the Mboka Festival. I went to Nigeria for the Lagos Arts and Book Festival. I went to South Africa for the Rutenang Book Fair. I went to Guinea for 72 hours of the book. Basically, what I was doing when I was traveling, I'd do stories about the place, I'd do little videos, I'd do photo galleries, and I was learning more about African literature and mainly its infrastructure. In February 2016, I lost my job at the newspaper. It was a very, very, very painful experience for me because I didn't know I was going to lose my job. There was no warning. And I had to find a way of surviving. I said, you know what? I've been doing this project. Let me try and see if I can do it full time until I find an alternative or until whatever happens. At that time, I decided to really, really focus on the publishing and writing infrastructure. I talk about, what are the publishers doing? What are the writers doing? At the time, I even set up a YouTube channel. There, I would actually post videos, and unedited, but videos I'd take on my cell phone. I'd go for festivals, I'd go for book readings, and that kind of thing, and I just post those videos online. At the moment, that channel has over 680 videos. It's arguably the biggest database of African literature in action on YouTube right now. I challenged you to find a YouTube channel with more information about African writers doing their thing online. 2018 was another year. I'd been talking about podcasts. I love podcasts. I listen to them. And I'd been talking about, telling all my friends, you should set up a podcast. And they'd be like, where's yours? I'm like, so I decided, let me set up my podcast. So 2018 is when I set up this podcast. I would post regularly initially. As anybody who knows podcasts, there's a bit of fatigue. And I'd abandon it for a long while, come back and do like maybe 3 or 4 episodes. I come back. Instead of doing what I used to do before, where I'd try and do like 1-hour podcasts, very long podcasts where you listen. And then it takes so much energy for me to do those that by the time I want to think of doing a podcast again, I'm just put off. My strategy is to do shorter podcasts. There'll be 10 minutes on specific individuals. In the last couple of weeks, I've done spotlights on Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Professor Neo Shundare, Beata Umbiei Maires, and others. If you're listening to this, you know that I've been doing these podcasts, and they go out to Spotify, they go out to Apple, they even go to YouTube. So we're back on podcasts, and we're not going to leave this time. 2020 was a huge year for everybody. The world was in lockdown because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and suddenly people were looking for more information on books and writers. And of course, as somebody who was producing content that was talking about books and writers, I got a lot of traffic that year. Actually, that year I think I had the highest amount of traffic, and I also had the highest amount of output because suddenly there's everybody's out there asking questions. You're producing. The project that we joined was the Afro-Lit Sans Frontières project. It was conceived by Zukiso Vanner and alongside Abubakar Adam Ibrahim. And that project was every month for about 6 months. For 1 week, there were panels where writers and readers can engage on either books or non-book stuff. And it was really exciting project. I mean, this is where some of us would learn about new writers in English, in French, Portuguese. And there was also a period when there was one of the festivals when it was only African languages. So you hear about writers doing work in Kiswahili, Ewe, Lingala, Hausa, Zulu, Amharic, Yoruba, and Shona. Now, this project allowed me to tap into networks that I hadn't had access to before. The project stopped becoming a project on Anglophone or English writing on the continent. It actually became a project on writing on the continent in many language groups, but being produced in English. 2020 was also the year we learned about how poorly our African brothers and sisters across the Atlantic, across the Mediterranean, how poorly they were being treated by their publishing industries. It all started with #PublishingPayMe, a campaign on Twitter where people would talk about how big the advances they had for their work. And it was really shocking. Like some of the biggest writers who were African or Black were being paid very small amounts of money by the publishing industries compared to some random mediocre white person just showed up and they get bigger amounts of money. I also noticed as that unfolded that even they were not having platforms. There were very few platforms that were talking about the work of Black writers or African writers in the diaspora. And I said, you know what? I might as well just put it on board. So 2020 was the year that I said, no, I'm not just going to do Africans in Africa. I'm going to do Africans in the diaspora. And I'll also be doing many different language groups on the continent. And I think that is the year that actually made the Writing Africa project really pop. Because suddenly you come to my website, I'm not just talking about Kenyans, Nigerians, Ugandans, or South Africans. Because you find that maybe you find information from about Brazilians, about Haitians, about German, Afro-German, Afro-Caribbeans. I mean, there are even Africans in Australia. So that is a year I think that may have made my website. 2021, what a year! That was a year that an African writer won basically all the major literary awards. I'm not playing, man. It's all of them. I'm just going to give you a few. I can't give you all of the list. Africans are winning their local awards, in Africa, the Kane Prize and the Etisalat. The Nobel Prize was won by Abdul Razak Gurna. He's a Zanzibari Brit. The Booker Prize was won by Damon Galgo, the South African. The International Booker Prize was won by David Diop. He was raised in Senegal. His parentage is Senegalese and Guinean. Prix Goncourt is basically the most important literary prize in French writing. That was won by Mohamed Bouassa, and he is Senegalese. Over in Portugal, the Camões, which is the most important prize in writing in Portuguese, it was won by Mozambican Paulina Chiziane. Over in Canada, the Giller Prize was won by Omar El Akkad. He has Egyptian roots. The Griffin Poetry Prize, that's arguably the richest poetry prize in the planet. It was won by Canisia Lubrin. She has Caribbean background. The German Book Trade Prize was won by Titi Dangarembwa. The Neustadt Prize for Literature went to Senegalese Boris Boubacar Diop. So you can see that 2021 was the year. So many writers were harvesting the fruits of investing so many years in literature. And here at Writing Africa, we were all there to cover that information. And I know there are other websites out there that'll tell you about this, but there's very few websites that have all that information in one space. In 2023, there was a shift. I mentioned before that the website was called jamesmuro.com, and through both a comedy of errors and a strategic shift, there was a rebrand of the website. The short version of that is the company that was hosting me messed up and didn't register the domain in time. I think those of you who've done websites know about this. And I did lose the domain. I could have registered jamesmuro.net.org, but I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what the website does as a new domain name. So I chose writingafrica.com, which weirdly enough was not taken. To this day, I'm so grateful. I didn't know how that was possible. The website became writingafrica.com, and of course the project became Writing Africa. No longer a name, no longer a personalized thing. It's a project that you can actually embrace and run with. Looking back, it's been a crazy 12 years, guys. I started this project knowing really very little about this industry. I was asking questions. I was trying to find out who's doing what. And I've come to learn about writing, about the writing industry, about publishing, about event organization and all that. I've been so grateful to attend hundreds of events in countries across the continent, Uganda, Somaliland, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, the Gambia, Mali, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Guinea. I've been to the UAE, and I've been to Germany. It's all because of this project, this website, what the work we've done on it. I'd like to say, guys, for all of you who stuck with me through this 12 years, and even before, but specifically for this project, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you, family, friends. I would not have been able to get this far without your support. I mean, you guys have been, you're the ones who you've actually given me money. You've given me tips of what's happening. You've asked people to call me up. You've given me projects. I'll be forever grateful to you. You can still support this project on Patreon. The Patreon starts at $3 a month. You can send money to PayPal. You can send money to Ko-fi. You can use mobile money. And I'm very happy to receive that. As a 12th year anniversary, send me $12. The information on how to donate, you can get it at writingafrica.com/donate. Please, guys, have a great time. I've got a lot of exciting things for you this year, and I hope you join me on the journey.